Hello wonderful people, I'm PvPSkillz and today we're gonna be looking at the Moonlight Greatsword, a legendary weapon, an exquisite blade. It picks its wielder and not the other way around. A weapon every sorcerer craves, either it be in Lodrin, Drangleic or Lothric. It is one of the only weapons that does not even have a shred of respect of boundaries between games, as it can be found in Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, plus Bloodborne. Even games that predate Souls have them, such as in the Kingsfield series. So as you noticed, From Software, the developers of Dark Souls 3, they have mad love for this weapon. So, does the Moonlight Greatsword retain its edge in Dark Souls 3? Let's find out. So first things first, how do you find this weapon? You have to kill Osoros, the Consumed King. He can technically be your third boss or your second if you exclude the tutorial boss, but for the average player, you'll get there in mid to late game, and that's the realistic option if you ask me. After killing him, you can transpose his soul by talking to Ludlith in Firelink Shrine. This boss bothered me the most, not in a gameplay sense, but his story is very vague, or I just couldn't make out his story, although he talks a lot in the fight, like a lot. He's the most talkative motherfucker, like the most talkative boss in the game, yet I couldn't make out his story. The only thing I knew is that he has a connection with Seath, a boss in Dark Souls 1. So I had to break me being in the dark about the game and read about him on the internet. That's the first time I actually do that, and as it turns out, his story is quite fascinating. If you look carefully at the boss, you will notice that he has no eyes, similar to Seath. He also eludes that in his rant. He keeps talking about an invisible or imaginary baby, and in the first half of the fight he seems to cradle an invisible entity in his arm. Weird shit if you ask me, yet still fascinating. There is a very interesting Reddit post my friend linked me that goes into detail about his story. I'll summarize it for you now, but you can find the link in the description. The King Osoros, who would later be known as the Consumed King, was obsessed with harnessing his blood for a higher purpose. I believe that the higher purpose was to produce an heir to the throne of Lothric that would validate the royal bloodline to some degree. To this end, he was willing to ally with the heretics of the Grand Archives. The scholars introduce him to the worship of the Pale Drake, Seath the Scaleless. Evidence of this is the soul of the consumed Osoros. It says Osoros went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose, leading him to the heretics of the Grand Archives, where he discovered the twisted worship of Seath the Pale Drake. Now, when you meet Osoros, he has been made into a strange half-dragon creature. In his later years, Osoros became fascinated with dragons. After going mad, he was more commonly known as the Consumed King. Many assassins were dispatched to his domain, but none returned. The Consumed King ascribed his resilience to the divine protection of the dragon scale. So Osoros was obsessed with magic and dragons in an attempt to improve his bloodline. He thinks he has succeeded in his attempts to uplift his blood with the power of dragons with his last son Ocelot. Well, the Lothric kings were obsessed with creating a worthy heir. However, for whatever reason, this was impossible for them, seeing as the description for the divine blessing suggests some relationship between the Lothric queen and the line of Gwyn. I believe that they wanted to finally produce an heir that would properly link the fire and finally succeed where Gwyn had failed. It is entirely possible that the Lothric line had raised their expectations so high as to what a worthy heir should be that they were unable to accept anyone as a proper heir unless they were above humans, such as dragons. Where Lorien, elder brother to the cursed Prince Lothric, was powerful enough to single-handedly kill the demon prince, yet even he was not considered a worthy heir. So this is the end of this summary, but on another note, if you read the description of the Moonlight Greatsword, it says Osoros, the Consumed King, was infatuated with the search for moonlight, but in the end, it never revealed itself to him. So from this description, I guess that this is not the real Moonlight Greatsword, especially that it doesn't glow moonlight at all. It seems very dark and it's very rusty also, so I theorize that it's not the real Moonlight Greatsword. I would like to hear your opinions on this. So this is all the lore I have on this boss, the Consumed King. But I'm very interested to see how his story will evolve as more people find out about his story. You never know, maybe I missed something, maybe it's much grander in scale, but this is all I have, so let's proceed to the build. So here is my build, and as always, the Moonlight Greatsword is an intelligence build, which is great. That means you'll never be playing with the weapon alone. Spells will always accompany your build. And it requires, as you can see, 16 in strength, 11 dexterity, 26 in intelligence, and has scaling D, E, and C respectively. So this weapon is mainly a intelligence build. However, you can still have a bit of physical damage, but I did not try this, and if you want to try this, let me know, because it requires high level builds definitely. Also, as you can see, my level is 125, although in the video I'll be playing anywhere between 100 and 117. This build is gonna be in my sorcerer build video, and I will be sharing much more tips on the sorcerer build and also on the Moonlight Greatsword in that video, so stay tuned for that. But as for today, we're just gonna look at the weapon exclusively. But remember, intelligence is your main stat, but you will need attunement for your focus points and for your spells. As I said, having spells with a weapon really complements it, and it becomes much better. Your tactics and strategies open up, you have much more things to do, and you become much more unpredictable. So this is very important. Let's proceed and look at the moveset. So let's take a quick look at the moveset. The moveset is very similar from the Moonlight Greatsword from Dark Souls 1 with a bit of touch from Bloodborne. And the main difference from Dark Souls 1 and here, that the charge R2 is the projectile instead of just R2 like in Dark Souls 1. Plus you have the battle art now, which is exactly the same like the one in Bloodborne, and it is terrific. However, you have to note that the charge R2 doesn't consume focus points, it consumes durability of your weapon. So if you spam it, your weapon actually might break very early, so having a repair powder is extremely important when using this weapon. So all in all, I think the Moonlight Greatsword has a very solid moveset. So now that we looked at the moveset, let's proceed to the tips and tricks. So when it comes to the Moonlight Greatsword, your first thing you need to do is pick your rings. The rings are very important here, especially that you're a sorcerer, and of course, as I said, I'll be touching on that more in the sorcerer build video. But the most important rings here you have to be using is first of all the magic clutch ring. So this ring, if you first look at it, it says that it increases magic damage. But when you look at your weapon, you see no increase. However, if you look in the menu at your right hand weapon, or your left if you put it in your left, but put it of course in your right, this is not Dark Souls 2, you can actually see the damage increase, and it's actually more than 50 damage, which is terrific. It makes a huge difference, guys. In turn, you get less defense of magic, but it's still not very, you know, nothing to worry about. The magic clutch ring increases your critical attacks considerably, you know, your backstabs, your riposte, your guard breaks, so you want to be using it, especially that everybody in Dark Souls 2 used to use them, although they're weaker in Dark Souls 2 than here. Although in Dark Souls 2 they did buff your spell damage, in Dark Souls 3 every equipment, you know, the staves, the talismans, they actually have a stat that actually tells you the spell buff percentage. So here I'm using the, what's it called again? The Court Sorcerer's Staff, which is Big Hat Loken's staff, which is from Dark Souls 1. And there's another two that are actually very good, but they're more niche. So use that one, it's the most easy to find and it's really good. And of course, keep buffing it. When you press L2, it actually buffs the staff and in turn buffs spells. Another thing I learned while using this weapon is actually great swords have hyper armor. Great swords, not ultra great swords. For 1 second there, before, you know, my previous videos, I thought that only heavy weapons have hyper armor. However, great swords, which aren't considered heavy weapons, they're considered, you know, in the middle between fast and, you know, slow, and they do have hyper armor, which is sweet, and you have to be using this all the time basically while using the Moonlight Greatsword. So just in case, although I do mention that in every video, but just in case you don't know what hyper armor is that when you press R1, R2, whatever attack, in the middle of the animation you actually become unstunnable, basically. So you cannot be stunned, so you can trade hits. However, I did feel that the two-handed mode actually has much more hyper armor than the one-handed mode. So when you want to trade, use that one. Now, another thing is your bread and butter with this weapon is actually the two-handed mode R1. It's the best attack in my opinion. Second comes the quick step, or sorry, the back step R1 and the running R1, which are very easy to dead angle and actually catch people off guard. And it's just so good. It's basically like Dark Souls 1, the running attack and the back step R1. Another thing is the R2s. R2s are really amazing. However, the projectiles are the worst of any Souls game. I hope they buff it. It's sometimes you just miss right in front of your opponent, like you charge that projectile and it's just standing there and it misses. So the strategy here is you want to be hitting your R2, but if you charge the R2, you can actually hit the projectile and your weapon at the same time, causing immense damage, guys, immense damage. Although this is true since Dark Souls 1, you can, you know, have hits, special hits combined with actual hits, and you will produce extreme damage. But here you have hyper armor, so it's on steroids. But yeah, so what I'm saying is don't aim on getting these projectiles. Only rarely you can get them, to be honest. They're just not that good. So you want to be actually getting your R2 attack. So it depends. If someone's close, just press R2. It already has a delay, so after the roll they'll get attacked. However, if they're a bit far away, charge the R2. So they need like 2 or 3 rolls actually to roll that, or actually they have to roll at the right moment. So it's kind of difficult for them to actually get the timing, and that's how you screw your opponent's timing. Just keep switching up. Sometimes just press the R2, sometimes charge it all the way, sometimes charge it midway, and that way you become unpredictable. However, they can be parried, so watch out. So going back to the rings, another important ring for this build is the Bellowing Dragon Crest ring. It increases the power of your spells. This is very important also because, as I said, the Moonlight Greatsword, when you're playing with it, you're gonna be either a pyromancer, a sorcerer, or even dark. Everything opens up when you upgrade intelligence, and if you go 18 faith, literally you can use almost all pyromancies. So you can actually be a pyromancer instead of a sorcerer, which is cool. So that way, if you're sorcerer, just switch. Sorry, if you're using pyromancy, just switch to the witch ring, or I forgot what it's called, which boosts pyromancies. So yes, spells are a tool that you should be using with this weapon. It just makes it more potent. One very important spell is the Farron sword, or the Farron flash sword, which is basically a straight sword spell. Basically, you can do running attacks with it. You can actually do backstep attacks. So it's actually like basically like a weapon that cannot be parried. Imagine how great that is. I think every sorcerer should be using that spell. Another important ring you should be using is the obscuring ring. When you're a spellcaster, you want to be, you know, as unpredictable as much as possible. Every time you go out of range, you become invisible. That's basically what that ring does. You become invisible from range, and you can cast spells and become much more unpredictable. My success rate went way higher once I was using it, especially on the recent build, which I'm gonna showcase in my sorcerer build video. The highest hyper armor move you have in your arsenal is the two-handed L2, so basically the battle art. That move, you cannot be stunned almost from anything. Once you go mid, or let's say 1/3 to mid of your animation, you're just unstoppable. Nothing will stop you. Even ultra great swords won't stop you. So trading will be amazing with this weapon. And this is what makes it shine, guys, especially in Dark Souls 1 and 2. Usually when you're a sorcerer, you don't have these perks. You don't have hyper armor, you don't have poise, you usually don't go for vitality because you want to go for spell casting and spell damage and weapon damage, and you just neglect the vitality part. So this is very cool. Really, it added much more potency to sorcerer. However, in turn we have weaker sorcery damage. However, a lot of people are saying that spells or spell casting is not viable, sorry, and that is incorrect. Definitely incorrect. Don't believe that. Yes, it's more difficult to use. Yes, they don't do as much damage. However, do you have more spells? Do you have cooler spells? Yes, and yes. Do some spells have crap tracking? Yes. Do some have good tracking? Yes. You had to be mixing up all those, all the rings, all the equipments, and you become just an unpredictable boss. This is what the Moonlight Greatsword is all about. More rings you should consider is a Sage ring, which increases decreases your spell casting, which is very important. But I didn't see a big difference. I did test it out. I didn't see a big difference. Dexterity actually also increases your spell casting speed, so that'll be interesting if you use a Dex Intelligence build. However, the weapon, I don't think the weapon, or it's a difficult build to do anyways, because you do need attunements if you want spells. However, if you want to just use the Moonlight Greatsword without the spells, you can actually go with Dex. However, oh yeah, you won't be using the spells, so there's no reason to do that. But yeah, the Sage ring is important. Another ring is the Farron ring, which decreases focus point usage. There are much more rings also that can actually help, which I will be discussing in great detail in my sorcerer build video. And yes guys, I think this is all I can say about this weapon. Its moveset is standard, however when used right it has a lot of depth, especially when you mix the R1s with the R2s two-handed. The R2s are my favorite, to be honest, after the R1s. Of course the R1s are most important, but why do I like the R2s? They are the one you can charge. That means they are the moves that actually make you more unpredictable, or you can catch people through rolls, after rolls, and all that. And yes guys, this is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace!